to the History She Wrote book club. We're gearing up for the release of the first 2 episodes in our series Centuries about Polish history. With that in mind, we thought a dive into some amazing Polish literature might be just what the historian ordered in order to get in the right mood for the premiere. Now, there's a lot of Polish literature out there. There's fiction and nonfiction. Books about Poland, books about history taking place in Poland, books set in Poland, books by Polish authors. The list is endless. And of course, the first author anyone with any love of Poland will recommend is Adam Mickiewicz. I'm not going to lie, after a year of immersing myself in all things Poland, I didn't have the strength to tackle Mickiewicz. Instead, I settled on a book written in 1986. It is fiction, but a fiction based on the facts of history. And although From Sarajevo to Red Africa is a history company, the truth is that literary fiction, good and honest fiction, is an important part of immersing in history. Nonfiction is wonderful to give the facts, but it can't give the feelings. It can't place the culture of a time and place over a reader like a literary shroud, and fiction can. For the next 6 weeks, we'll be reading The Beautiful Mrs. Seidenman by Andrzej Szpiorski. Written in 1986, it was originally titled The Beginning and was not published in the Poland that was enmeshed in the last throes of communism. In fact, the author was a member of Solidarity and imprisoned during martial law. But The Beautiful Mrs. Seidenman isn't about the 1980s in Poland. It tells a tale about Poland's previous tragedy, World War II. And as you can probably tell, it centers around a group of people who all know a beautiful woman named Mrs. Irma Seidenman. The first few pages of The Beautiful Mrs. Seidenman not only tell us the ultimate fates of most of the book's main characters, but also the overriding personal characteristic of this group of profoundly decent people who do what they must to survive the horrific Nazi occupation of Warsaw. What they all share, Jew and Gentile alike, is a profound sense of being Polish. This is explicitly stated in a speech given by Judge Rumniski to the Taylor Kujawski as they discuss what else? The war. And Kujawski states a desire for peace. As you know, dear Mr. Kujawski, Arbeit macht frei, work makes man free. And it makes him especially so in the sunshine of European peace. We will lack only one thing, only one, the right to say out loud that we want a free and independent Poland, that we want to brush our teeth and go on holiday in our own way, conceive children and work in our own way, live and die. This is the one thing we'll find missing in the sunshine of European peace, which you, my friend, hold to be the highest good. And when the tailor protests that, of course, peace must mean the removal of Hitler, the judge replies with an inarguable truth. Hitler will only be removed with war. To have peace, one must have no Hitler. But to have Hitler, one must have war. It's an absolutely profound statement, and one that, if we are honest, we can still see in the events unfolding across the globe today. Some truths of war and politics are timeless. We're introduced to several main characters in the first 45 pages of this book. The judge, the Taylor Kujawski, Pavelek, Krinsky, Hanio Fichtelbaum, and finally, Mrs. Seidenman herself. A beautiful woman with blonde hair, blue eyes, a slender figure, and a very Jewish history. Mrs. Seidenman has managed to spend the last 4 years under fake papers, hiding from the final solution behind her very non-Jewish looks, right in plain sight. But as it so often happened during the war, even that was not enough when she was spotted by a former acquaintance while getting out of a rickshaw one day, and then taken straight to the Gestapo headquarters on Schutzes Street to claim a bounty. Mrs. Irma Seidenman had been spotted by another Jew, a man who was only able to survive due to his ability to track down Jews who had escaped the tightening net of the final solution being implemented wherever the Nazis managed to touch. There were fewer of these informants than one might suppose. In the Krakow ghetto, amongst about 20,000 people, there were less than 100 of these informants operating. In the Warsaw ghetto, there was an actual gang known as the Group 13 operating, which was involved in all sorts of criminal activities while collaborating with the Nazis. The leader of the historical Group 13 managed to escape the Warsaw Uprising and was sentenced to death by Jewish resistance in Poland, but his fate is ultimately unknown. The fate of the informant turning in Mrs. Seidenman, however, was not freedom. His collaboration did not end with long life. Instead, a year after the events of Mrs. Seidenman's arrest, he was shot in the ruins of the ghetto. And here, as we close out our first book club episode on the beautiful Mrs. Seidenman, it's important to note an interesting quirk of this novel. While the novel deals with one event, Mrs. Seidenman's arrest and its aftermath, it also seamlessly moves back and forth between the past and the future. Nearly as soon as we meet characters, we know when and how they will die. The story is not about that. We know Mrs. Seidenman survives, but the story is not about her survival, or for that matter, anyone else's survival or death. Instead, it's about the very Polish relationships which carried through a hideous, horrible war. There will be spoilers, alert, because, and I can't stress this enough, the entire story is a spoiler to every other aspect of the story. Next week, we'll be tackling up to page 83 of The Beautiful Mrs. Seidenman, and I'm not going to talk around things that might be spoilers, because it's impossible. And if you love this book as much as I do, I highly recommend a tour of Warsaw with our Polish history expert, Marta. Marta can take you to all the sites in the beautiful Mrs. Seidenman and tell you all the stories of a city reborn from its own ashes. It's all well and good to visit a city, but it's even better to understand it. And Marta is the perfect person to get you there. See you next week with even more about Mrs. Seidenman.
Oh, I love it!